Priests and lay worshippers in Ethiopia are on a mission, centuries-old religious manuscripts and sacred artwork in efforts to preserve traditions and heritage.
Ethiopian monks have released a once-forbidden page, even though they were ordered to destroy it, and it clearly mentions Jesus. Imagine. What if the most famous story you were told since childhood turns out to be incomplete? For the past 2,000 years, the world has been reading a book whose final pages seem to have been quietly torn out. We've been told that everything ended at the empty tomb. Just Jesus rose, then the sky, and the story ends. But the question is, what if the real final chapter is hidden somewhere else? And what if that chapter is so different that it shakes the very definition of God, death, and the human soul? It's said that far from Rome, in the ancient stone monasteries of Ethiopia, monks have been preserving a different kind of religious record. A tradition that includes books numbering far more than the commonly accepted 66, up to 81. Words no one wants to speak openly. These unseen fragments not only reveal the events following the resurrection, but also hint at what that event could mean for the relationship between humanity and God. The biggest question now is, if the true final chapter was hidden somewhere, what edited version have we been relying on all these years? And what truths will the pages now being revealed shake us up? What story does this page hold? Why was it kept silent for so many years? What changes does it make? Join us to discover the truth hidden within this special page. And such knowledge is rare on this channel, so be sure to support us by subscribing. And Ethiopia is a place often overlooked in mainstream Christian history. But the truth is that the monks living in Ethiopia's stone monasteries not only preserved the faith, but also preserved a version of history distinct from the rest of the world. While the Bible was reduced to 66 books in most places, the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church still possesses a canon of 81 books, a full 15 books longer. At first glance, it might seem like these were later additions or derived from local beliefs, but the truth is much more profound. These books are not new additions. They were also considered sacred in the early Christian tradition. This means that there was a time when these texts were part of the spiritual stream, not external material. Ethiopia preserved these not because they needed to add something new, but because for them they were always part of the original tradition. While religious meetings and councils in various parts of the world were deciding which books were considered authoritative and which were not, Ethiopia was geographically distant. The church there did not feel the need to remove texts they already considered sacred. For them, this was not a matter of choice or debate. It was their heritage. These additional books included texts like the Book of Enoch, the Book of Jubilees, and the Maccabees, which are also mentioned in the handwriting of the early church fathers. This means that these were not completely unknown or later creations. Over time, religious structures changed in different regions, and some texts gradually fell out of the mainstream. But this did not happen in Ethiopia. In its monasteries, the monks copied these texts from generation to generation. Handwritten manuscripts, leather covers, and books preserved within stone walls. All of this combined to form a living library. Even as power and religious structures were changing in Europe, this tradition continued in Ethiopia without major interference. The existence of these 81 books is not a new claim, but has been a part of their religious identity for centuries. It was not a mystery to them, but was unknown to the rest of the world. Science validates the archive. By now, anyone might have heard all this. A simple question arises. Okay, Ethiopia has 81 books. But is there any concrete evidence for this? Or is it just tradition and belief? For centuries, Western scholars held this view. So they often assumed that the texts preserved in Ethiopia were later works, perhaps stories from the Middle Ages, with no direct connection to early Christianity. Thus, the idea persisted that real history resided in Europe, and elsewhere only its local shadows. But then science entered the debate. Radiocarbon dating was performed on manuscripts known as the Garima Gospels, preserved in an Ethiopian monastery. This wasn't a conclusion based on guesswork or tradition. It was a scientific test. When the age of the ink and parchment used in these texts was measured, the results changed the entire debate. These manuscripts were written between approximately 330 and 650 AD. This means they date back to a period when much in Europe was still unsettled, and traditions of knowledge were crumbling in many places. What does this mean? Simply put, while Europe was going through what later became known as the Dark Ages, a period when the preservation of knowledge was constantly challenged by political instability and social change, monks in Ethiopian monasteries were copying these texts, preserving them, and preparing them for transmission to future generations. This is no small feat. The Garima Gospels are today considered among the oldest illustrated Christian manuscripts in the world. This means they preserve religious texts with not just words, but also pictures, showing how systematic the tradition of writing and preservation was in Ethiopia at that time. This raises a significant question. If these texts are truly so old, is it possible that certain traditions, ideas, and spiritual perspectives were preserved in Ethiopia before they entered the European mainstream? Here, a clear conflict emerges between science and ancient skepticism. Whereas it was previously believed that the center of history was Europe, and the rest of the world adopted traditions later, the dating of the Garima Gospels opens the possibility that in some places the original material may have survived with greater continuity. Book of Enoch, Cosmic Backstory. Now begins the strangest and perhaps most shocking part of the story, the Book of Enoch. This is where the story of the Great Flood takes on a completely different form. We're generally told that the flood occurred because humans had become wicked, sin had increased, and the world needed to be cleansed. But the Book of Enoch takes this story to a much larger scale. It says the problem wasn't just humans. Something else transpired, something beyond this world. And according to this text, 200 watcher angels, called Watchers, descended to earth. They are said to have chosen a place called Mount Hermon, where they arrived with a kind of oath. This was no ordinary arrival. They directly interfered with human life. They mated with human women, and the offspring they produced were called Nephilim, a race that was neither fully human nor fully divine. According to the Book of Enoch, the Nephilim's size, power, and influence were so great that they disrupted the earth's balance. The story isn't limited to just giants. The real twist comes when it's revealed that these watchers imparted knowledge to humans that wasn't intended for them. This could be called a kind of forbidden technology transfer. The names of their leaders are also given, such as Samyaza, Aziel, and Barakiel, and they are said to have taught humans how to make swords and weapons, thus instilling the art of warfare. They taught the use of cosmetics, which became more than just decoration, but a means of attraction and influence. They taught star reading, thus initiating astrology and divination. According to Enoch, all this wasn't just knowledge, it was a disruptor of balance. This means that humans didn't just stray morally, but also gained tools and ideas that allowed them to transcend the laws of nature. This story shows the flood not just as a punishment, but as a reset, as something that had happened that needed to be brought back into balance. Why Rome rejected it? The biggest question now is this. If texts like the Book of Enoch were part of the early tradition, how did they fall out of the mainstream? What was it about them that the Roman Church later found uncomfortable? The point is that as Christianity developed into an organized religion, it needed not just faith, but also order. A clear, simple, and understandable story was essential to bind society together. But texts like Enoch depicted the world as extremely complex, where humans were not alone, but also under the influence of various spiritual forces. This presented a messy, or complex, spiritual picture. The challenge for the Roman Church was that religion should not be limited to individual experience, but also provide stability to society. This required a framework that clearly distinguished good from evil and focused responsibility on human behavior. The story of Enoch did not fully fit this simple framework. Therefore, over time, when deciding which texts were considered authoritative, those texts that were more clear and systematic for the wider society gained priority. Texts that deviated from this approach gradually became less read and dropped from the main list. The 40 Secret Days. Now the story takes a completely new turn here. For if the Book of Enoch changed the picture of the past, the Mashapha Kaidan, the Book of the Covenant, changes the story of the time that matters most, the days following Jesus' resurrection. We're generally told that after Jesus' resurrection, he had a few encounters, delivered a few messages, and then ascended. This time is, as it were, a brief bridge between death and heaven. But Ethiopian tradition considers this intervening period to be the most crucial part of the story. According to the Mashapha Kidan, Jesus didn't appear for a brief moment after his resurrection. He remained with his disciples for a full 40 days. And this time wasn't just for consolation. It was a kind of preparation, like a teacher giving his students a final, in-depth explanation of the real work ahead. In the Western tradition, this period seems relatively brief and symbolic, but in the Ethiopian view, it becomes the main chapter. Here, Jesus speaks not just of miracles or events, but of the inner direction of life. He urges his followers to emphasize inner understanding over external structures. That is, the focus is not on stone temples or formal structures, but on the mind and heart. According to this tradition, he explains that true spirituality lies not in external buildings, but in the awareness within the individual. And he tries to convince his followers that faith should be based not on any institution or position, but in the individual's own consciousness. Here, a major difference emerges. While organized religions evolved over time into rules, positions, and structures, these teachings emphasize direct and personal understanding. This is not a message of opposition, but rather a point of balance, that external structures can be helpful, but the ultimate goal is inner clarity. The Mashapha Kidan also explains that this 40-day period was a period of profound learning. It emphasized understanding the relationship between life, the soul, and the world. This reveals the idea that the spiritual journey is not limited to collective rituals, but is rooted in each individual's personal understanding. In this view, spirituality is not something distant, or accessible only through a particular place or person. Rather, it exists within every individual, and can be understood through awareness and meditation. This offers a new perspective, that the story of the resurrection was not merely an event, but the beginning of a process in which individuals can move beyond external support and recognize their inner strength and understanding. This difference does not suggest that one tradition is right or wrong, but rather shows that the same event was understood and preserved differently by different communities. In some, this time unfolded briefly, while in others, it was remembered in a detailed and profound way. Spiritual War Framework. Now, another deeper layer emerges in the teachings of Mashapha Kidan, one without which the entire picture remains incomplete. It speaks not simply of spiritual peace, but of a kind of inner struggle. Within this tradition, a concept emerges, the builder of shadows. This is not a simple demonic figure, but rather a symbol of a force that distracts humans from inner understanding by entangled in external things. In this perspective, the glitters of the world, such as wealth, prestige, and power, are not all bad, but it warns that focusing on these can lead a person astray from their true purpose. This is where the idea of shadow comes in. It symbolizes the illusion that resembles reality, but actually distances a person from their inner self. It is in this context that the concepts of stone temples and inner temples emerge. External temples, buildings, and structures may be important, but these teachings emphasize that the true temple lies within the mind and heart. Stone buildings may crumble over time, but inner understanding and awareness endure. This suggests that the spiritual journey should not rely solely on external rituals or structures. Organized religion may play a role in shaping society, but the inner understanding of the individual is even more important. This is not a message of opposition to any institution, but rather a sign of balance, that both external order and inner consciousness have their place. These teachings also mention two winds blowing within the human being, one leading to life and the other leading to delusion or decay. This idea is symbolic. It does not imply that humans are two separate beings, but rather shows that there is a constant tug-of-war within every individual between positive and negative tendencies. The wind of life leads to clarity, compassion, and balance. The other wind, here described as leading to delusion or rigidity, can push a person toward selfishness, ego, and imbalance. This struggle is not like an external battle, but a constant inner choice. Thus, the idea of spiritual warfare emerges, a battle not with external weapons, but with thoughts and tendencies. This battle is not against any institution or person, but rather an effort to maintain balance within oneself. The key message of these teachings is that external structures can be helpful, but true stability comes from within. When a person recognizes their inner temple, the illusions of the external world affect them less. Science echoes the texts. Much of what has been revealed so far may seem spiritual or symbolic. But an interesting aspect of the story emerges when some ancient ideas begin to bear a resemblance to modern scientific understanding. This isn't to say that ancient texts were scientific texts, but sometimes there's a strange echo between the language used in them and today's discoveries. Texts like the Mashafa Kidan speak of wind passages or doors. This may have been symbolic language at the time, but today we know that global air currents have a profound impact on the Earth's weather and climate. Modern science has shown that wind currents are not just local, but part of larger currents circulating around the entire Earth, what we understand as jet streams or global air circulation. The ancient term wind passages may take on a different meaning in modern understanding. Similarly, some texts mention deep water beneath the Earth. For a long time, this idea may have seemed like fantasy, but in recent years, scientists have discovered traces of water trapped in a mineral structure called ringwoodite in the Earth's mantle. This water is not open like an ocean, but rather bound within rocks. Nevertheless, this discovery shows that the presence of water beneath the Earth's surface is also possible, an idea previously thought to be limited to the surface. These similarities do not mean that ancient texts were providing scientific descriptions, but rather that they were attempting to understand nature through their language and symbols. This is where the metaphor of spiritual influence can also be viewed in a new way. In some traditions, negative tendencies are described as gradually affecting a person's thinking, as if there is an invisible influence that disrupts the balance. In modern science, we know that the environment, experiences, and the flow of information can influence our thoughts and behavior. In this way, the metaphors used in ancient texts can be understood in a broader context. They used symbolic language to explain natural phenomena and human experiences, while today science explains the same subjects differently. This similarity can be seen not as direct evidence, but as a dialogue, where past explanations and present discoveries sometimes seem to point to each other. This gives the sense that throughout the ages, humans have tried to understand the world around them, even if their words and methods may have been different. And the Ark moves to Ethiopia. The story now brings us to a point where history, tradition, and mystery converge. The journey of the Ark of the Covenant. This is the sacred ark mentioned in ancient texts. It is commonly described as a gold-plated box containing the tablets of the Ten Commandments. But in Ethiopian tradition, the story doesn't end there. It begins there. According to ancient Ethiopian legend, the story revolves around the Queen of Sheba. She is said to have traveled to Jerusalem and met King Solomon there. This meeting wasn't just a royal visit, but forged a deep bond between the two civilizations. This union led to the birth of a son, Menelik. Later, when Menelik grew up, he traveled to Jerusalem to visit his father. From here, the story takes an interesting turn. But according to the Ethiopian text Kebra Nagast, meaning glory of kings, Menelik received an offer to remain in his father's kingdom, but he decided to return to his homeland. Some young Israelites also returned to Ethiopia with him. During this time, according to the story, a major and secret move was made. It is said that the original Ark of the Covenant, kept in Jerusalem, was replaced with a replica, and the real ark was quietly transported to Ethiopia. This was not an open transfer, but a secret journey, traveling up the Nile River to the highlands of Ethiopia. From here, the ark's role transcends that of a mere religious symbol. The texts describe it not only as a sacred object, but also as a powerful instrument. Some stories state that its presence could cause extraordinary events, such as a bright light, unusual effects, or a power that could provide protection during war. These accounts can be interpreted in different ways. Some consider them spiritual symbols, while others see them as an energy-related metaphor, as if they represent a special power that protects and guides the community. In Ethiopia today, it is believed that the ark is kept safe in a special place. Whether viewed as a historical tradition or a symbolic tale, the significance of this story lies in the fact that it depicts a connection that spiritually connected two regions. In this way, the story of Sheba to Solomon and from Solomon to Menelik becomes not just a story of a dynasty, but part of a tradition that lives on in cultural and spiritual identity today, and this is where the idea emerges that some stories are not just events of the past. They become part of a community's memory and beliefs, which continue to be passed down through time. Guardian and power. Now that the ark has arrived in Ethiopia, the question arises, who guards it? And is it merely a religious symbol, or something more? According to Ethiopian tradition, the ark is still kept safe in a special chapel, but the method of its protection is quite unique. Only one person is chosen to care for it, a person called the guardian. Once someone is given this responsibility, they remain in that place for life. They do not go out. Their interactions with others are limited, and their entire life is spent protecting it. Interestingly, some reports state that some guardians have experienced strange physical changes over time, such as diminished eyesight, changing skin color, or premature fatigue. These symptoms have been interpreted differently. Some attribute them to the effects of a demanding lifestyle, while others attribute them to the stress associated with this sacred responsibility. Some legends link the ark's power as if it were not just a symbol, but a center of profound energy. Another event in Ethiopian history is often mentioned, The Battle of Adwa in 1896. At that time, the modern Italian army attacked Ethiopia. They possessed superior weapons and resources. Despite this, the Ethiopian army defeated them. This victory is considered extraordinary. Local traditions sometimes say that the Ark's presence during this conflict boosted people's morale. It was seen as a symbol that strengthened unity and faith. Whether this actually happened is beyond history, but this story shows that the Ark became not just an object, but a center of cultural identity. Over time, the Ark's story wasn't limited to Ethiopia. In medieval Europe, groups like the Knights Templar were also interested in the mysteries associated with it. They were known for their search for sacred objects, and many legends surrounding the Ark circulated. This indicates that curiosity about this casket was not just local, but global. Lalibela. Engineering mystery. The story now brings us to a place in Ethiopia that still amazes people today. Lalibela. The churches built here weren't built by joining stones like any other ordinary building, but were carved directly from the solid rock. In other words, the entire structure was carved from within, just like a statue. These churches were carved from a single rock from top to bottom. Windows, doors, pillars, and even the drainage system are all part of the same stone. Most interestingly, despite such a massive construction, there's no major debris left behind. When the rock was cut, millions of tons of stone must have been removed. But where did it go? This question still haunts people today. Local tradition also tells an interesting story. It's said that laborers worked during the day, but at night, angels came to assist in the construction. That's why the work was completed much faster than expected. This story may also be symbolic, to show that the task was more difficult than a simple endeavor. Some modern thinkers have tried to look at it from a different perspective. They believe that special methods of cutting or shaping stone may have been used at the time, such as the use of sound or vibration. This is only a theory, but it suggests the possibility that ancient construction techniques may have been more advanced than we realize. The churches of Lalibela still stand as an engineering mystery. They remind us that there have been moments in history when human creativity and technological understanding made possible feats that remain difficult to fully comprehend even today. Bloodline and modern awakening. Now, the final part of the story takes us beyond mere buildings, texts, or symbols to a much larger idea: the tradition of bloodline and the modern age of awakening. The tradition of the Solomonic dynasty of Ethiopia traces itself to King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. According to this narrative, a lineage beginning with Menelik spanned centuries and reached the 20th century. The last of this lineage is Emperor Haile Selassie, who reigned until 1974. For his supporters, he was not merely a king, but a symbol of a historical link connecting the past and the present. This idea is not limited to tradition. Modern genetic studies have found that Ethiopia's population was influenced by people from the Levant region, present-day Israel and surrounding areas, in ancient times. This suggests that there was a movement of people between the Middle East and East Africa thousands of years ago. This strengthens the possibility of a historical connection, even if it is not easy to directly link it to a single narrative. This raises another interesting idea. Some ancient texts mention a time when the world will be entangled in a web of confusion, where people will be connected, but it will be difficult to distinguish between truth and falsehood. In today's digital age, where the internet has connected the entire world, this idea is understood in a new context. The rapidly expanding flow of information, differing perspectives, and constantly changing narratives, all of this can create a web in which maintaining clarity becomes challenging. During this period, a renewed interest in ancient texts and traditions is also being observed. Some consider this a cultural renaissance, where different aspects of history are being re-understood. The study of these texts is seen as a kind of guide, not as an emergency solution, but to understand how past traditions can shed light on the questions of the present. All of this raises a major question. Has history always been presented to us as it was? Or did different societies adapt it over time to suit their own context? This question doesn't demand a single answer, but rather provides an opportunity for reflection. Was history merely preserved, or sometimes edited? So now the question is for you. If history isn't always told to us in its entirety, are we ready to know the truth? If you want to understand more hidden histories and mysteries like this, subscribe to the channel so you can be the first to see such videos.